In this tutorial, we're going to build this clean, professional Moka Pot model completely from scratch, step by step. Hi, I'm Hossein, and welcome back to another modeling tutorial. Today, we're going to model a Moka Pot, the iconic stovetop coffee maker that you'll probably recognize if you're into coffee. Just like in the previous tutorials in this series, I've prepared a reference image with multiple views of the model. We'll use that as our guide to make the modeling process easier and more accurate. I'll upload the reference file to my Telegram channel. If you haven't joined yet, I highly recommend checking it out. The channel ID is on the screen, and you'll also find the link in the video description. And if you don't want to join, no problem, you can simply take a screenshot of this image and use it as your reference. A lot to cover, so let's not waste any time. Let's jump straight into the modeling process. First, let's set up the project units. I'll right-click Units at the bottom of the screen, choose Unit Settings, and set the units to millimeters. Next, I'll drag and drop the reference image directly into Rhino. The picture dialog will appear, and the default settings are perfectly fine, so I'll just click OK. Then I'll place the image by clicking one corner and dragging to the opposite corner. Now it's time to scale the reference. I'll select the image, run the scale command, and use the diameter of the Moka Pot as my reference, just like you see here. Then I'll enter 80 millimeters, since the real diameter of this model is 8 centimeters. That puts the reference at a very accurate real-world scale. Next, I'll use the polyline command to draw a few cutting lines. Then I'll run split to separate the image into 3 individual views, so each piece contains only one projection. After that, I'll place a point right at the center of the model. This point will act as a reference throughout the tutorial and help us keep every part of the model properly aligned. Now, using the gumball, I'll position all 3 reference images in their correct locations. As you can see, I'm also creating a temporary construction plane to make it easier to line up the height and position of each view. Go ahead and follow the same steps until all 3 views are perfectly aligned. Great. There's just one extra piece left from the top view, so I'll use split one more time to remove it. Now our reference images are clean, organized, and ready for modeling. Before placing the images into their layers, I'll run the purge command once to remove any unnecessary layers and extra information from the project, keeping the file clean and optimized. Now I'll create a new layer called Pics, and inside it I'll create 3 separate sublayers for each view: top, front, and right. Next, I'll select each image, right-click on the corresponding sublayer, and choose Change Object Layer to move the image into its correct layer, just like you can see on the screen. Now I'll select all 3 images together and go to the Display section in the Properties panel. I'll set the object transparency value to 50%. This makes the images slightly transparent and gives us a better view of the geometry while modeling. Finally, I'll lock the Pics layer so the reference images won't accidentally move while we're working. Now everything is ready and we can start modeling. To begin, I'll run the polygon command. I'll set the number of sides to 8 because the main body of the Moka Pot has an octagonal cross-section. I'll place the center of the polygon exactly on the point we created earlier. Since the diameter of the model is 80 millimeters, I'll enter a radius of 40 millimeters. Next, we also need a circle. As you can see, I'll draw a circle and move it slightly away from the polygon to leave enough space for the next modeling steps. This distance looks good. For now, we don't need the right view, so I'll temporarily hide that layer to keep the workspace cleaner. Alright, first I'll move these 2 reference views slightly upward so the bottom of both images lines up exactly with the base of the model. I think everything is ready now. At this point, we have 2 main sections, a circle and an octagon. If we look at the front view, you can see that the bottom part of the Moka Pot has a completely circular shape, but slightly higher, the cross-section changes into an octagonal form. So, based on the reference, I'll move the octagon slightly upward. However, there is an important detail here. The real octagonal shape of the Moka Pot is not made of perfectly straight edges. Each side has a slight curve. So this polygon is only being used as an initial reference, and now we'll create the actual shape based on it. For now, I'll hide the circle because we don't need it anymore. I'll keep the center point and the main axis, since we'll use them later in the process. Now I'll use the control point curve command to draw a curve. As you can see, this curve only has 3 control points: the starting point, 1 point in the middle, and the ending point. Then, using array polar, I'll duplicate this curve 8 times around the center of the model to create all the sides. Finally, I'll use join to connect all the curves together. As you can see, we now have an octagonal shape with the same subtle curved edges that we see on the real model. Now I'll show all the layers again so we can see the complete reference and make a few small adjustments. First, using the gumball and a little bit of scaling, I'll make the circle slightly smaller to create the required distance between the sections. Then I'll move the new octagon to the correct height. With one click, I'll activate the control points. I'll select only the corner points and move them slightly upward from the front view until the body curve matches the reference perfectly. Now I'll select both the circle and the octagon, and from the front view, I'll use the mirror command to create a copy on the opposite side. Since the body becomes slightly narrower toward the top, I'll use the gumball while holding the shift key to scale this section uniformly until it matches the reference. Now we have the 4 main sections of the body in their correct positions. Finally, I'll run the loft command and set the style option to straight sections so the initial body surface is created exactly the way we need. Now we need to close the bottom part of this section. To do that, I'll select the circle and the bottom edge, then use the planar curves command to create a surface and close the bottom of the model. Next, I'll create an offset from the top circle toward the inside. I'll set the offset distance to 5 millimeters to create an inner circle. Then, I'll use planar surface again to turn the area between the outer and inner circles into a surface. After that, I'll select the inner circle and use extrude curve with solid its no to extrude it about 7 millimeters downward. The reason I'm keeping solid turned off is because at this stage we only need a surface, not a closed solid. Now it's time to create the thread for this section, the part that will later connect with the upper section of the Moka Pot. For this, I'll use the helix command. First, I'll isolate this part so we can work on it more easily. Then I'll enable the center OSNAP and create the helix exactly from the center of the cylinder. I'll set the number of turns to 5, and the radius of the helix will be exactly the same as the radius of this cylinder. Now that the helix is created, I'll use the gumball while holding the Alt key to create a copy of it. I'll move this copy slightly outward to create the thickness of the thread. Then I'll use the loft command to connect these 2 helices and create a surface between them. Finally, I'll use extrude surface to give this surface a thickness of around 0.2 millimeters, completing the thread shape. And that's it, the thread for this section is ready. Now we just need to select the main body the upper cylinder, and the bottom surface, then use the join command to combine them into one continuous surface. With that, the lower part of the Moka Pot is complete. Now let's move on to modeling the upper part of the Moka Pot. Since we deleted the initial construction lines earlier, we need to recreate them. For that, I'll use the duplicate edge command to extract the edges of the octagon as well as the center circle. After selecting the edges and pressing enter, I'll use join to combine the extracted curves into one continuous curve. Just like before, I'll use mirror to create a copy of it, giving us the top and bottom sections needed for the next modeling steps. Now we also need the top edge of the threaded cylinder. I'll use duplicate edge again to extract this edge, and then create an offset of about 1 millimeter outward. This creates the necessary space for the upper section to sit properly on top of the threads. Next, I'll use extrude curve with solid equal no to extrude this curve and create a thin cylinder that fits exactly over the threaded section. Now I'll position the upper circle and octagon in their correct locations. The goal is to make this section perfectly aligned and tangent to the cylinder we just created. Again, using duplicate edge, I'll extract the bottom circle and octagon so we can use the same dimensions for building the upper part. I'll join these curves together and then use mirror to create a copy. Now I just need to move them slightly and use the gumball while holding the shift key to scale them until they match the reference perfectly. With that, the main sections of the upper part are ready. Now, just like we did for the lower section, we need to create surfaces between these profiles. For the curves that are on the same level, I'll use the loft command to create the surfaces. However, for the two upper curves, planar surface cannot create a surface because they are not on the same plane. To fix this, I'll use the set XYZ coordinates command and enable only the z-axis. This will place both curves perfectly on the same plane. Now I'll run planar curves again, and this time the surface will be created without any problems. Now it's time to create the surface for the upper section. First, I'll select the curves of this part. There is one important detail here. Unlike the lower section, the top edge is completely flat and doesn't have a circular profile anymore. So I'll use the set XYZ coordinates command with only the z-axis enabled to place these curves on the same plane. Now that everything is prepared, I'll select all the curves and, just like before, use the loft command with the straight sections option to create the surface of the upper section. As you can see, the overall shape of the upper part of the Moka Pot is now complete. Next, I'll use the join command to connect all these surfaces together and create one continuous surface. Now let's go back to the lower section. Since this part is basically a metal shell, we need to give it some thickness. For that, I'll use the offset surface command. I'll set the offset direction toward the inside, enable the flip all option, and enter a thickness value of 1 millimeter. Now the body has a realistic metal thickness. Since the body has thickness, I'll also select the thread we created earlier and use the Boolean union command to combine them into one solid object. Alright, now let's move on to modeling the coffee outlet. First, I'll switch to the top view and change the display mode to ghosted so we can see the model more clearly while drawing. Before starting, I'll hold Ctrl and Shift and select the required edges as sub-object selections. Then I'll move them slightly until they match the reference image perfectly. Now, using the polyline command, I'll draw the overall path of the coffee outlet. I'll keep the first line we created as the symmetry line. Now, using control point curve, I'll draw only the left half of the profile. Then I'll use mirror to create a copy on the opposite side. And finally, I'll use join to connect the two curves and create one closed curve. Now that the profile is ready, I'll use the extrude curve toe point command to extrude this curve toward a point and create the initial shape of the coffee outlet. To make sure this part cuts perfectly with the main body, I'll move it about 1 millimeter to the right. The reason for this small movement is to make sure the two surfaces slightly intersect, allowing the split command to work properly. Now I'll use split to cut the extra part, remove the unwanted section, and then move the piece back to its original position. If you look closely after this step, some points might no longer match the original shape perfectly. To fix them, I'll hold Ctrl and Shift and select the required points as sub-object selections. Then, using Move or the gumball, I'll carefully adjust them until the shape of the outlet is clean and accurate. Now that both parts are perfectly aligned, I'll use the Join command to combine them into one continuous surface. And with that, this part of the model is complete. Now let's move on to modeling the lid of the Moka pot. For this part, we need the same octagonal curve we created earlier. I'll use the duplicate edge command to extract the required edges, and then use join to combine them into one continuous curve. Now, using the center axis, I'll use the mirror command to copy this curve to the opposite side. Then I'll use join again to create a complete closed profile. Next, we need to make some adjustments to this profile. The area that sits above the coffee outlet needs to be slightly wider so it can properly cover the opening. For that, I'll draw a guideline, remove the extra parts using the trim command, and then join the curves again to create the final lid profile. Now, I'll use the same construction point we created earlier as the axis reference. I'll move it about 10 millimeters upward until it reaches the correct position. Then, using the extrude curve toe point command and this point as the target, I'll create the main surface of the lid. Now the overall shape of the lid is ready. I'll also remove the extra construction lines to keep the model cleaner. Just like we did for the main body, I'll use the offset surface command to give the lid a thickness of 1 millimeter. I'll do the same for the coffee outlet section as well, so all parts have the same thickness. If, after adding thickness, some edges are not perfectly aligned, I'll hold Ctrl and Shift to select those edges as sub-object selections. Then, using Move or the gumball, I'll make small adjustments until all connections are clean and there are no visible gaps. After that, I'll move the lid about 1 millimeter upward using the gumball to create a proper gap between the lid and the main body. Now I'll use the extrude surface command to give the lid a 1 millimeter thickness. Since these surfaces are positioned at different angles, I'll set the extrusion direction to direction and define a custom path so the thickness is applied consistently across all parts. Alright, the main Moka Pot model is almost complete, and the only parts left are the handles. Let's start with the side handle. First, I'll enable the right view layer again and define the connection point between the handle and the main body. Then I'll draw that profile, use set XYZ coordinates to align it exactly with the center axis, and use extrude curve with both sides set to yes to extrude it in both directions. Now I'll move this surface slightly so it passes through both the body and the lid. Then, using the split command, I'll cut the necessary sections and remove the extra surfaces inside the model. Now let's create the handle itself. First, I'll draw a 2D profile using control point curve. The goal is to create a closed curve that we can extrude later. I'll connect the beginning and the end of the curve using a polyline, and then use join to turn it into a closed profile. Now, using set XYZ coordinates, I'll place the profile exactly at the center of the x-axis. Then I'll use extrude curve to create the main volume of the handle. After that, while holding Control and Shift, I'll make some small adjustments to the edges to create a cleaner and more natural shape. To make the handle look more realistic, I'll use fillet edge with a radius of 1 mm to round the sharp edges. Now let's move on to the knob on top of the lid. To start, I'll select the same octagonal profile and place it in the correct position. Then I'll use set XYZ coordinates to adjust its location precisely. I'll move this profile 20 mm upward, create a copy of it, and finally use the offset command to create a 5 mm outward offset. Now, the initial profiles for the top handle are ready. Now I'll place a point exactly at the center of these two profiles and use it as a construction point. Then I'll connect these two octagons using the loft command to create the main body of the handle. Next, I'll loft the upper octagon to the point we created earlier to form the tip of the handle, the diamond-like shape that you usually see on real Moka Pots. After that, I'll use the join command to combine all these surfaces together and turn the handle into one continuous piece. Finally, I'll use fillet edge to slightly round the connecting edges of the handle, giving it a smoother and more realistic appearance. And that's it. The modeling process for this Moka Pot is complete. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and learned some new techniques along the way, as well as getting some ideas that you can apply to your own projects. If you found this video helpful, make sure to give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the upcoming tutorials. And as always, if you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to leave them in the comments. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end of this tutorial.